And welcome back to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, coming solo this afternoon. Justin Lowry unavailable this week, unfortunately, but we'll still hear from Justin by way of his picks for Money in the Bank upcoming this weekend, the latest WWE pay-per-view. We're going to talk about that, go match by match with my predictions and Justin's predictions. We'll see who comes out on top in that regard, but there's a lot of stuff that we need to discuss before we get to Money in the Bank, and really even before we get to WWE this week, because probably two big stories, one of which involves All Elite Wrestling and one of which involves some stories about Vince McMahon and maybe his potential role in the downward spiral that WWE has been taking. First, we'll begin with All Elite Wrestling, and the news is significant, and certainly if Justin was here, he would probably give his perspective of what this means to him, what this means to the wrestling industry, but word came out officially this week after weeks of speculation that All Elite Wrestling will be on cable television. They have a deal now set in place with TNT, and for those who were around about 15, 20 years ago, yeah, it was almost 20 years ago at this point, that was the former home of WCW with Monday Nitro. When the Monday Night Wars were at their peak, it was USA with Monday Night Raw and TNT with Monday Nitro going head-to-head. This is going to be a little different. It does not seem like, pending some details, it does not seem like it's going to be a 2 or 3 hour show at this point. It'll be a little shorter. It probably will not go head-to-head with WWE, so you're looking at probably Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, as opposed to Monday or Friday, which will be the new home for SmackDown when Fox takes over in October. But it's still big nonetheless. It shows the belief that TNT and Turner has in this promotion, All Elite Wrestling, before it has even really held its first show, the upcoming pay-per-view, Double or Nothing. There's some news on that, how it can be ordered. The prices came out, I know, on Comcast and Xfinity, which I have. It was originally $60, and then I heard there's some other outlets that'll be a little cheaper, $50. But nonetheless, there's some debate as to if that's an exorbitant price for really a first event for a promotion, especially when you figure the WWE Network at under $10, you're getting basically 5 months of pay-per-views in addition to all the other content for the price of one probably 4 hour, maybe 3.5 hour pay-per-view that All Elite Wrestling will be having. In that sense, it's not a great bargain by any means, but there's still a lot of interest. I don't think that everyone's going to be deterred by that price tag, but certainly they're going to have a number of viewers, and I fully expect that at least the first month of their television, when it does come to TNT, there's going to be a lot of eyes and a lot of interest, and they have to be good right out of the gate going on a major network. I think that while TNT has some belief and some long-term confidence in the product, you got to come out and get big ratings, and so I think All Elite's going to have to make sure that they pull out all the stops. But the best news that they could have received is that they will be on cable television and a network that formerly had great success with professional wrestling. I mentioned Vince McMahon and how there's reports that came out this week. So basically, one of the dirt sheet writers, I guess, has a weekly radio show or podcast show, probably slightly below the quality of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Nonetheless, there was, I guess, someone that called in who was very familiar with the writers in WWE and kind of gave the perspective of what's happening with the writers and how, for the most part, the writers aren't having their material make it on TV. It's all Vince McMahon shooting down all these creative ideas. And again, that might be a one-sided perspective. I don't know exactly how accurate that is, that maybe they have these great ideas. Well, we don't really know. All we can see is the final product that makes it on a TV each and every week. But there's been plenty of rumblings that Triple H is frustrated, that he right now is struggling to get through to Vince McMahon and sort of maybe just realizing that Vince McMahon's not going to change, and Vince is going to stay in control and do it his way, and he's probably pretty stubborn and set in his ways, and right now the company is definitely spiraling downward, in large part because of its inability to change and become up-to-date, contemporary. I think some of the other things that came out about Vince McMahon were really just condemning things, like telling Andrade to learn English and get back to me if you want to push, so on and so forth. Well, first off, that's not professional, but bigger issue is they already have a mouthpiece with Zelina Vega who speaks perfectly fine English. That kind of is the reason why she's with him, so that Andrade doesn't have to speak much English. I'm sure he is working to improve, but it's that mindset that Vince probably already has him written off as a big star for that reason. And we've heard something about Luke Harper as well, where Vince just was not interested because Luke Harper couldn't do a Southern accent, so he just had no reason to use him. A report about Mojo Rawley, where they really had some plans in place, and Vince just got bored with it after a couple of weeks with the mirror vignettes and just gave up on it. And now Mojo finally was on Raw this week, but it was really insignificant. No one cares about him because any momentum you were building with that, those vignettes, that sort of died when they disappeared for about a month's time. This happens very frequently where he just does not seem to care about making guys into big things, big commodities and superstars, true larger-than-life stars. It seems like he has a very select few that he's interested in, and anything beyond that doesn't really matter to him. But so all these things that came out this week, basically the feeling and the vibe after hearing that is there's a lot of good people in this company. Apparently the writers could be in that category as well, but a lot of good people backstage and obviously great talent, that they're doing everything they can, but it all comes down to the final decision of Vince McMahon. And Vince is doing really nobody favors with the decisions he's making. The report was that he really doesn't follow NXT. He'll watch takeovers every now and then. I don't think that's a surprise. That's sort of been out there from the get-go when NXT began its popularity, and it seems like they don't really continue the momentum from NXT guys that they build down there to when they come up to the main roster, because Vince is probably seeing them up close and personal for the first time, and what they did prior means almost nothing to him. So you kind of start from scratch, and a lot of guys, they never really got off the ground. So it's to the point now where you have to wonder, is Vince ever going to figure things out the way that he's doing business, or is it going to take Vince stepping down or being replaced before this company can really make strides? The XFL is coming back in less than a year's time. The report today that I saw is that Vince McMahon will do both. He will continue to run day-to-day operations with WWE. He will continue to run the XFL, and who knows how long that's going to last. My estimation is, at best, they'll make it through one season again, like the original version of the XFL. But we saw from the most recent football league that was somewhat of an alternative to the NFL, it made it, I think, 4 or 5 weeks before the plug was pulled. And technically, the league hasn't folded, but it looks like it's pretty much heading that way. Everyone's just hoping and praying that Triple H takes over, and I think that would be the difference that this company needs to finally get back on the right track, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And after reading this report, even if it's not fully accurate, even if some of this stuff is close to factual, it really has to be alarming for superstars and for fans alike of WWE to hear that Vince McMahon just seems this stubborn, this oblivious, this set in his old ways that seemingly just aren't working anymore. And you have to wonder, will there finally be a turning point where he loosens the reins under his control and maybe delegates a heck of a lot more? Because I think that would really benefit the wrestling industry as a whole at this point. Let's now get into the week that was in WWE. And again, it's Money in the Bank this weekend, so we'll go over the predictions with that. We'll kind of give a preview of some of the bigger matches as well. But go-home shows on Raw and SmackDown. They were over overseas European tour, and things already, just 2 weeks into this wild card, it just feels so overdone to see Roman Reigns on Raw, see Elias on Raw, see the Usos on SmackDown, see Charlotte on Raw. Because right now, at least for the next handful of months, the next 5 months or so, you get people on Raw on Monday. 24 hours later, you're seeing a lot of those same people on SmackDown because of the wild card rule. I don't want to see Roman Reigns 2 consecutive nights. And then, of course, we're going to see him at Money in the Bank. We could very easily see him on Raw and then SmackDown. That would be 3 consecutive nights, potentially this weekend into early next week. I got the same feeling for Charlotte. The brand split, while the ratings are falling, I don't think it's a result of the brand split. And I think that in theory, it makes a lot of sense to split these up. Now, when you get to Monday and Friday, that's enough space that, maybe you can use guys twice a week on TV, both on Raw and SmackDown, and it doesn't feel so overexposed. But as of right now, I just, Raw kicks off Roman Reigns again, and I'm just thinking, oh, and I'm a Roman Reigns fan. It's not just him, but it's anyone that you see multiple segments on Raw, and then you see multiple segments on SmackDown, and it's just too much already. We're 2 weeks into this experiment, and it's just, to me, it's not working. And I know that the ratings haven't, especially with SmackDown, I think the ratings actually went down. So it's not working at this juncture. Getting Roman on Raw, maybe it helps a little bit in one segment, but, throughout the course of the night, I'm not sure it's making a big difference. And then you tune into SmackDown, and at least from my perspective, I'm less excited to see Roman. I'd be more inclined to tune out because I just saw him the night before in a multi-segment appearance, and now he's on SmackDown in multiple segments. So these are things that I really would like to clean up. But it seems like desperate for ratings, they're going to continue with this wild card. And again, the 4 people, but you watch the show and you feel like, well, that has to be more than 4, right? Oh, tag teams count as 1, and oh, I guess they didn't really count this. And Apollo Crews was one of the wild cards, and that was just like people didn't even realize he was on SmackDown. He lost in under 2 minutes. The early returns are not good in my estimation for the wild card. I think that maybe if they wanted to do something like that, have like one person per show that goes over and make sure you mix it up. You don't want Roman Reigns every week, but that's exactly what it feels like. This feels like wild card was made so that Roman and Charlotte could go to Raw every week, and you can get the Usos on SmackDown every week. And the other aspect of it that hasn't been discussed yet, at least by myself and Justin Lowry, is the people who wrestle on Raw. Theoretically, they work Friday, Saturday, Sunday for house shows, and then Raw on Monday. Then they're done. Well, if they have to stick around and go to SmackDown, they're working an extra day each week. It doesn't affect the SmackDown people as much because they're already on the road Monday, usually doing a house show elsewhere. So they probably prefer to be on Raw as opposed to working a house show. But for the Raw superstars that have to stick around and work an extra night each week, that's also going to, take its toll and probably wear people down and maybe rub them the wrong way long term. Nonetheless, as far as what was notable on Raw, I didn't think there was a whole lot with the exception of a change for the Money in the Bank men's ladder match, and that came in the main event. It was Braun Strowman wrestling for his spot against Sami Zayn, and ultimately Sami Zayn won with the help of Drew McIntyre and Baron Corbin, as you see Sami getting his arm raised over Corbin. He's now in the match, and all of a sudden, I consider him to be one of the favorites because I know a lot of people have said they don't like how people were just given spots in this match, both for the men and the women. I agree with that. They should have had to, win qualifying matches, make it seem like it means something to get in there to be a superstar that's amongst those vying for this Money in the Bank briefcase. But now you have a match to determine what was, for all intents and purposes, the final spot that was going to be decided. Sami Zayn wins it. Sami Zayn's also been cutting these promos each and every week about, basically people are saying it's what Vince McMahon and some of the other, people feel about the audience. He's really speaking for Vince McMahon, saying, oh, these critics, oh, shut up, so on and so forth. You're never happy. Well, this indicates to me Sami Zayn might be getting a big push. And he's been getting great reactions as well. We always know he's a great in-ring competitor. And they haven't even really shown that since he's returned from injury. But if I'm a Sami Zayn fan, which I am, I'm thinking this is great news for Zayn. He's in the match. He got in Monday by winning the main event. He might be one of the favorites. And really, to me, I think he is the favorite. Now, the question is what happens with Braun Strowman. We could very easily see Strowman takes out Zayn, or takes out Corbin, or takes out McIntyre, and regains a spot in the match. This could all happen on Sunday, so I'm not even 100% sure Sami Zayn will be part of the match when it's all said and done, but I think people will be happy if you push Sami Zayn. It's certainly long overdue for him. He should be one of the top guys in this company, and it's interesting to see how they go forward with him, but looks like he's potentially set up for a big role. One of the guys who helped him in that match was Baron Corbin, as I said. And Corbin was sort of in a controversial outcome on Raw. He defeated cleanly Ricochet. And it was a fine match. It really, Corbin's not terrible in the ring. We've said this before. He's not awful. But he's just one of those guys that I don't think people really want to see. And yes, he gets boos. But in my estimation, at least the way I view it, and I think many fans would share this sentiment, Corbin gets boos because he's a guy you just don't want to see. Not you want to watch him lose. That's a good heel because it forces, the fans to really support the good guy. But I think Corbin's a guy, yeah, you want to see him lose, but even more, you probably just don't want to see him on TV. If he's on Raw, you're probably saying, I'd rather have someone else out there other than Baron Corbin. That's not a great thing because that can, force viewers to tune out, and that can force the fans in the arena to, head to the bathroom, head to the concession stand. Corbin beating Ricochet, that just seems like a slap in the face of a lot of the smart wrestling fans. And Ricochet's a guy new to the roster, and especially new as a singles guy after he and Alistair split up after the Superstar shakeup, that really needs to get some big victories. Now, the way this company works, Ricochet loses on Monday. All of a sudden, he could win Money in the Bank on Sunday because it seems like a lot of times they have guys either right before they win Money in the Bank or right before they cash in Money in the Bank after they've already won, that they're losers. They lose, and this is like a way to change their luck. I don't really like that. I would have rather seen Ricochet get some momentum, and he did on SmackDown. He was part of the wild card and, so on and so forth. But if you're only watching Raw, you see him lose cleanly to Baron Corbin. Probably not a great sign for the one and only. And again, it's just one of these things that, like, you can't only cater to the wrestling hardcore enthusiasts and savvy fans, the internet fans, if you will, as opposed to the casual fans. But, like, having Corbin beat Ricochet just seems like that's a move that's just going to tick people off. And you can tick people off every now and then and get away with it, but when you do it on a regular basis, well, those fans eventually leave. So, not saying, necessarily there's going to be a mass exodus of wrestling fans. Well, there already sort of has been, but in particular because of that outcome. But it just seems like, man, this company, it's Baron Corbin personifies what Vince McMahon's about now. He's behind this guy that, fans really don't like, that he's mediocre. And for whatever reason, Baron Corbin's in big segments each and every week, and all these uber-talented guys are sitting in the back not being on, or they come out for a week, then they disappear, or they consistently lose matches. I don't know. It just seems very bizarre that Baron Corbin, of all people, who really hasn't had the it factor that so many thought he did when he debuted in NXT, he seems to be missing that, and that was such a big thing for Vince McMahon, is, charisma and personality, and Baron Corbin doesn't really have any of that. So why he beats Ricochet, well, that's beyond me. But that just seems to sum up how WWE has been booking recently. We jump over to SmackDown, and I mentioned that you're sort of tired of seeing the same guys Monday and then Tuesday. Well, that's how you kind of felt with this match. It was Elias, Shane McMahon, Daniel Bryan, and Rowan. And yes, they're all SmackDown superstars in a sense. Shane really, I guess, at this point is on both Raw and SmackDown. And then they go against Roman and the Usos. Well, this was basically to set up more build between Elias and Roman. And they also had banned Miz, so of course the Miz comes out after the match for him and Shane. And then out of it, we get Daniel Bryan and Rowan against the Usos for a kickoff show at Money in the Bank. Kind of a bizarre use of a match. And I'm not sure if it's even a title match, because technically the Usos are on Raw. Of course, Daniel Bryan and Rowan are the SmackDown Tag Team Champions. Just a weird use of, all these different people. Now, it's good for Elias, because this is a guy that really needs to be in the, the marquee matchups and a big-time feud, which he has. Probably good for Rowan. He's sort of riding the coattails of Daniel Bryan. But 4-on-3 handicap, and then it's Roman and the Usos against the Authority, if you will. The odds stacked against them. We've seen this so many times. And after seeing Roman so much on Monday, and then he comes out again on SmackDown in the opening segment, I think fans already, they're sick of it. They're sick of him going against the Authority, against the stacked deck. We've seen this so many times, and it seems like the only way that this company knows how to write for a face is to make them an underdog against a, overwhelming heel Authority. So that was just really not the right use of those guys, and it just seemed like a lazy effort to put everyone together in a single match. The other notable thing on SmackDown I thought was, a lot of complaints that the internet has are very justified. This one I thought was a little overblown. A new name for Asuka and Kairi Sane, the Kabuki Warriors. First off, people flipped out. They said it's stereotypical, it's racist, it's awful, so on and so forth. Why do you change the names of people? In this case, I don't think it's that big of a deal. First off, they keep their individual names, Asuka and Kairi Sane, and that's simply their tag team name. So it's not as bad as, for instance, the Viking Raiders or the Viking Experience or the Viking Warriors. Of course, that was a complete change because they also changed their individual names. So you really had no idea, this was a whole new group, theoretically, if you followed NXT. Well, in this case, it's not that big of a deal. And then Paige on Twitter basically said they chose that name, meaning Asuka and Kairi Sane. They wanted that name, or at least a variation of it. So the people who are complaining and saying Vince is an idiot, so on and so forth, this case, it's not worth getting upset about. It's not that big of a deal. It doesn't change them. Now, if they had gone a whole character change and they were coming out in ridiculous costumes and looking, farcical, then I could see the argument. This, I don't think, is a big deal. But nonetheless, the Kabuki Warriors win a match in sort of dubious circumstances. They got a roll-up on Mandy Rose after she had made a tag with Sonya Deville. They are teasing that those two are going to break up at some point. I guess Sonya plays the face down the road. She gave up her spot for Mandy Rose in the Money in the Bank, so Mandy is in, Sonya's out, but you have to wonder what's going to come of this. Mandy has to be a heel, I think, so Sonya is going to be the face, and you have to wonder, is she going to be a big face, or is she just turning face, breaking up this tag team, and then she'll kind of just, be there? Sort of what, like Carmella has been recently, where, she'll be out there every now and then, but no real direction, no real purpose to make the change. I would expect that would come after this Sunday, probably starting next week on SmackDown. So you have one woman's tag team maybe trending towards a championship match against the Iconics, and the other tag team that appears that it's the final days of that group. That was really it for Raw and SmackDown. I did not take a lot away from the shows this week. Again, there was some stuff that, maybe was decent. I thought that on SmackDown it was sort of interesting. They had the 4 SmackDown combatants for Money in the Bank all in a fatal 4-way, and they were really using the ladder frequently, showing a lot of spots that will be done this Sunday. To me, my first reaction is, well, they're giving all this away. Why are we going to watch the pay-per-view? But I think this is an example of what we're going to start to see more often in the weeks and especially months to come. I think that WWE is going to really start giving away a lot more on weekly television to increase the ratings there, because I believe the subscribers are pretty solid on the network. And, so many people have the network. Even if a pay-per-view is not good or a string of pay-per-views isn't that great, there's so many other reasons to have it. You get NXT, you get various other shows. I watch 205 Live. You get the library of all the old pay-per-views that it just makes sense to keep the network, even if you're not a huge fan of the current WWE product. I think there'll be way more emphasis on having some bigger, more significant moments and matches on Raw and SmackDown. And when you see, basically a four-way that involves the latter, my first thought is they're giving it away. But upon further consideration, I'm thinking, well, that's maybe a way to increase ratings for SmackDown. So we'll see what happens. It leads up to Money in the Bank, and a show that's had plenty of time for build, but it still doesn't feel like it was built all that well. I like that there was a big gap between this and WrestleMania. Let's take a look at the matches and give the predictions. And again, Justin Lowry unable to be here, but I will speak on his behalf. The Money in the Bank men's ladder match is the first one we'll discuss. And this one, it's sort of hard to predict, and that's not a bad thing. But it's hard to predict because you have to look and who really has a lot of momentum and who do you believe Vince McMahon's going to be behind. You see Andrade, Ricochet, Drew McIntyre, Finn Balor, Sami Zayn, a late entrant, Baron Corbin, Ali, and Randy Orton. I was thinking all along Drew McIntyre. He had a big WrestleMania match against Roman. He lost it, but he seems like a guy that Vince really would get behind. We've already seen him get a pretty big push when he came up to the main roster. Seems like his time. You typically want a heel having the briefcase. It just works better for heels. So I'm thinking Drew McIntyre's the guy. But what I saw on Monday was Corbin and McIntyre playing second fiddle, Sami Zayn being the focal point with Braun Strowman. Now it almost feels like Strowman, McIntyre, Corbin. That's a side feud that probably will continue. So I'm thinking Sami Zayn might be the pick. And yes, that's going out there on a limb because Sami Zayn hasn't really been viewed as a main event caliber guy for most of his main roster run, and he's just back. But I think my pick, Sami Zayn in this one. And yes, it's maybe going out a bit because, again, I don't even know for sure Sami's going to make it to this match. I could see Strowman destroying him even before the match begins. But I'm going with Sami Zayn. Last minute change. I would have gone with Drew McIntyre had the 8 men stayed the same. Justin's sort of playing off of that. He is picking Drew McIntyre to win Money in the Bank. I really hope that this match feels like a main event because it looks like one of the title matches, either the Raw or SmackDown world titles or maybe even one of the Becky Lynch title defenses will go on as the main event. But it should feel like a big-time match with the briefcase hanging. Let's look at the women's match. Same type of scenario here. You have 4 from Raw, 4 from SmackDown. Now, this graphic shows Alexa Bliss. Word just came out this morning. Alexa's not medically cleared, and I really hope it's a storyline just to get her out of the match. I don't think it is because they probably could have done something to write her out of this on Raw. They didn't. So my concern is what's going on with her health-wise. I mean, it's going on almost a year now where she's really struggled to compete on a regular basis. So you hope that it's, nothing that's serious here, maybe just precautionary. I thought Alexa had a chance to win, although I would not have gone with her because she won last year. She's out now, and it really opens up this match. When you look at, first off, who replaces her? Well, it could be Nikki Cross. She filled in for her on Monday. It could be, someone else that's sort of just been around with nothing to do. I mean, you look at Asuka and Kairi Sane are probably not going to fill that role because, 1, they're on SmackDown, 2, they're a tag team. You figure it's going to come from Raw. Ruby Riott is a name that's been thrown around. I think, however, it could be Sasha Banks, and there's been rumors that she was going to return to this, so that's why I'm wondering, was Alexa taken out of this match on purpose? So whoever takes Alexa's role has a real chance to win this match. That being said, I am going with the group that we know in there for my pick. I'm picking Bayley, and I feel a little less confident after she was just basically doing a backstage vignette on SmackDown. I would have liked to have seen her in a more prominent role. But I think Bayley has a real opportunity here for a turning point in her career. And Justin agrees. He goes with Bayley as well. Now the question is, if Bayley wins this, she theoretically challenges Becky Lynch, right? But I guess that depends on if Becky retains or not. If it were to be Bayley and Becky, does Bayley turn heel? Or maybe they avoid that altogether. If she wins, maybe she goes against Charlotte on SmackDown if Charlotte wins that title. But I think this is an opportunity for Bayley to win this match and to really try to salvage her career, because it has not been a good couple of years for Bayley. She was great in NXT and hasn't come anywhere close on the main roster. A chance to turn it around here potentially. World title match, AJ Styles, Seth Rollins, should be a great match. I think this one should be pretty easy to pick. I hope so, at least. I'm going with Seth Rollins. Seth just won the title at WrestleMania. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to take it off of him. Basically his first significant title defense, and yeah, I guess technically had one against Kofi Kingston. That match got thrown out. But I think Seth Rollins is the pick here. AJ, he's been a champion so many times. He doesn't need to win a championship. He's just come over to Raw. He's going to be a main eventer no matter what happens. And Justin agrees with me. He goes with Seth Rollins in this match as well. So we agree Seth Rollins retains the Universal title. And by the way, I think that Seth needs to have a run at least until SummerSlam, if not beyond, to really get some stability behind that title that has been beleaguered since it debuted. The other title match for a world title, it's the WWE title on SmackDown. Kofi Kingston defends against Kevin Owens. Same basic explanation I had for Seth Rollins. Kofi just won the title. He's still getting massive ovations. He might be the most over guy in this company. Potentially. He at least is up there. Kevin Owens, he's a really good heel. He's a former champion, but he's a guy that we've seen, like, this company doesn't have a problem with him losing. They don't always protect Kevin Owens. He loses here. It's not the end of the world for him. You don't want him, obviously, embarrassed, which has happened before in his career. I think he needs to be a legitimate threat, but I could see him losing, and maybe a guy like Big E or, in particular, Xavier Woods comes out and proves to be the difference. But I think Kofi Kingston retains his title, and Justin Lowry, my cohort, agrees. He also is going with Kofi Kingston. Let's look at the two women's title matches. I don't know exactly how this is going to play out as far as will they be back-to-back, will they space them out, which one will come first. Becky against Charlotte, and Becky against Lacey Evans. So there's a couple issues here. One, the rumor was Becky was going to go to Raw after she lost one of her titles, which means she would lose the SmackDown title, go to Raw, be on that show exclusively. But with this wild card thing, does that matter? She really could do both shows whenever, whether she's two champions, whether she's one champion, whether she has no title. She can move back and forth between the shows. So I don't think that's going to be a big factor. One, had the company wanted to continue using her on both shows before the wild card, they would have maybe been more inclined to have her retain both titles. But right now with the wild card, you can do whatever you want. So it doesn't really matter what happens if they're worried about Becky Lynch and how to use her and get her on both shows. They can really leave it open here and make it unpredictable, because theoretically Charlotte could win the SmackDown title. Becky could go to Raw, but she could still come to SmackDown. Same with Lacey Evans, and I don't think it's time for Lacey Evans yet, and I think it would be a major mistake to have her defeat Becky. If that were the case, theoretically Becky would come to SmackDown, and then you're looking at a really thin Raw women's division, especially if Alexa Bliss is out for any extended period of time. The way I look at it, Becky retains both titles. I think she defeats Lacey Evans first, and then she defeats Charlotte later. My only question is, she defeats both of them. Does someone, maybe Bayley, maybe whoever else wins, cash some Money in the Bank in on Becky Lynch that night? And I think that probably will happen. That's a good way to have Becky lose a title, but make her look really strong in the process and make someone else get some really big-time heat. So I think Becky defeats both Lacey and Charlotte, but loses one of her titles. And with the Money in the Bank briefcase, if it's cashed in on Becky Lynch and she has both titles, how does that work? I would think it's whatever show the superstar is on who cashes in, they would win that title. So Bayley, for instance, would win the SmackDown title, but this company can make up rules, so you never really know. That's my pick, is Becky defeats both Charlotte and Lacey, but ultimately loses one of the titles later in the night. Justin Lowry, at least with the outcome of the two scheduled matches, agrees he's going with Becky Lynch for both of them. Final match we're going to discuss a little bit more in depth. Roman Reigns and Elias. This is a big one for the man formerly known as the Drifter. Elias needs a win. Go back to all of his pay-per-view matches since he's come up. There's not a lot of wins. There's not a lot of significant matches. Him and Seth Rollins for the IC title a little more than a year ago, or actually it was, I believe, a year ago because it was the Money in the Bank, but it was Money in the Bank, of course, was June last year, so it's just, about 11 months, I guess. Nonetheless, that was probably his biggest match to date. He lost that one, and then Seth moved on very quickly. I think this feud will continue, and I think it continues because Elias sneaks out a victory. I don't know how it's going to happen. It might be by DQ. It might be by countout. Maybe Shane McMahon helps. That would probably be my pick, is that Shane or someone else helps Elias. But I think Elias gets the victory here. Now, Roman's going to win the feud. But if Elias wins a match, he can really build off of that. And he becomes even more prominent. I think that since he's come to SmackDown, he's been a much bigger deal. So I go with Elias. Justin disagrees here. He goes with Roman Reigns. And it is hard to pick against the big dog. Again, I certainly think he wins the feud, but I believe in the meantime, Elias wins maybe the battle as opposed to the war. The other matches, The Miz and Shane McMahon, both Justin and I agree it's The Miz. We thought he was going to win it at WrestleMania. It didn't happen. They wanted to draw this out. I think we're going to see a shift from Shane focusing on The Miz. That'll probably end on Sunday, and then he goes full on with Roman Reigns. Why Shane needs to be involved in so many feuds, I don't know, but that's what they're doing. So I think the Miz wins that one, and that's the end of that. Samoa Joe, Rey Mysterio. I think Joe wins, but it's not a guaranteed thing because Joe really embarrassed Rey at WrestleMania. Now, that was probably because Rey was banged up, but Mysterio, it could mean a lot for him to win. It would be big for his comeback to have a title, and now they're introducing his son Dominic, so he's probably in line for something big. But I will go with Samoa Joe. I just don't see the reason to have Mysterio beat Joe at this point, unless you're going to have Joe be the next challenger for Seth Rollins. I don't get that feeling, though. So I'm going with Samoa Joe. And then two matches that really are under the radar. Daniel Bryan and Rowan against the Usos. It's on a kickoff show. Again, I don't even know if this is a title match. I'm thinking it's not. You got to go with the new champions, Rowan and Daniel Bryan. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have the Usos on Raw beat the SmackDown champions. So I'm going with them. Justin is also going with them. And then lastly, the Cruiserweight title, 205 Live's Tony Nese, the champion defense against Arya Daivari. New champion of WrestleMania, Tony Nese. No reason to have him lose it, especially not to Arya Daivari. He just doesn't seem like a big-time name. So I think Tony Nese retains, and Justin agrees. Let's take a look overall at our predictions. Pretty close again, as always. Justin and I typically on the same page for most. We vary for the Money in the Bank for the men. He's going with Drew McIntyre. I'm going with Sami Zayn. We agree with Bayley, Seth Rollins, Kofi Kingston, Becky Lynch ×2, The Miz, Samoa Joe, Daniel Bryan and Rowan, and Tony Nese. The other match we disagree upon, I'm going with Elias. He's going with Roman Reigns, but I kind of have to go with Elias, right? I got the shirt behind me. I walk with Elias. So that's going to do it for our predictions. I think this could be a pretty good show. You look at the title matches, the world title matches, KO and Kofi, that should be very good. Fans will be into it. Fans will really be into Seth and AJ. Even though they're both faces, AJ's playing a little bit more of the heel, but those are two great in-ring competitors. The Money in the Bank match is always exciting, even though the build hasn't been great. They should have had the qualifying matches. They didn't, but the matches should live up to expectations. And then you have some other matches that, you hope that the fans are able to take interest in. Two Becky Lynch matches. I think they will. It has to be done correctly. And then a big spot for Elias. You're also looking at hopefully the end of Shane and Miz. And then the other matches kind of, not as big of a deal. So anticipation-wise, I'd put it maybe at like a 7.5. I think it's always big to see who wins the briefcases because that person, you get the feeling, not always, especially not recently, but you get the feeling they are getting a big-time push and they could be a champion sooner rather than later. I think you have to pick the right people. We'll see what the company does. Last year, Alexa Bliss, people weren't excited, but it made sense storyline-wise as she won the title later in the night. And then they ruin it with Braun Strowman. He wins, turns heel, basically doesn't even do a cash-in. He just uses it for a title match, loses. never was heard from again. That's not the right way to do it. So hopefully they have better long-term plans this year, but that might be asking a bit too much with this company. That's going to do it for this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. You can follow us on Twitter, 5-Star Pod Wrestle. Check us out on Instagram. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go back and check out all the old videos. Next week, the plan is Justin Lowry will return, and we will do a live episode. We will stream that one on YouTube and potentially on some other outlets as well. But that's going to do it for this week. Once again, you've been watching the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. We'll catch you again right here next week.